The world was burning. Smoke twisted into the thick, gray sky, and the air smelled of fire and death. Ailari, princess of the Enrine Empire, stood on the edge of a crumbled village, her green-scaled boots sinking slightly into the dirt. Her heart weighed heavy as she stared out at the ruins. Her people, the Enrine, were here on a peace mission. The war between humans and their enemies had taken so many lives, and now even the neutral zones were unsafe. Villages like this one were torn apart in the crossfire. Her mind raced with thoughts of the Enrine's responsibility to help, yet all she could see was destruction. "Your Highness, we should move on," said one of her guards, his voice steady but filled with the kind of fear that only came from seeing the devastation up close. Ailari didn't reply. Instead, her eyes scanned the wreckage. She stepped forward, her bright blue armor reflecting the dim sunlight, her body tense and alert. The guard's warning was clear. There was no time for distractions, but Ailari couldn't move forward. She heard something. A soft, broken cry. Following the sound, she reached a corner of the village, where the rubble piled high. Beneath it, something shifted. Slowly, Ailari crouched down, her eyes narrowing. Then she saw it. A small human child, barely 5 or 6 years old, was buried beneath a broken piece of a house's roof. His face was smudged with dirt, his clothes torn, and his tiny chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Ailari's heart clenched. She was used to battle. She was used to pain. But this was different. The child was alive. Without thinking, Ailari reached down and carefully moved the rubble aside. Her hands were gentle as she lifted him, pulling him into her arms. His small body trembled, and his eyes were wide with fear. But he didn't cry. His lips quivered, but he was silent. The Enrine princess held him close, trying to comfort him with her warmth, though she didn't fully understand why she felt so strongly about this child. He was human, her people's enemies in the war, but there was something in his eyes that reached through all the pain and confusion. He needed her. She whispered softly, rocking him slightly. "You're safe now." The boy didn't respond, but after a few moments, his small hand slowly reached up and grabbed hold of her gloved fingers. His grip was weak, but it was there. The bond was formed. One of her guards stepped forward, uneasy. "Your Highness, we can't stay here. We must move." Ailari nodded slowly, but her gaze never left the child in her arms. "No, we will take him with us." The boy, still silent, buried his face against her chest. Ailari could feel the warmth of his body and the steady beat of her own heart. In that moment, she made a promise to herself. She would protect him. And when he was stronger, when he was ready, she would send him back to his people. But for now, the boy, this child who had lost everything, was in her care. And she would not let him suffer any longer. Weeks passed since Ailari had found the boy. His name was Sol, though he had not spoken it at first. He was silent, lost in his own thoughts. But slowly he began to trust her. He began to speak again, though his words were soft, as if he was afraid to break the peace they shared. His laughter returned too, a small, delicate sound that filled the quiet corners of the ship as it traveled through the stars. Ailari had grown close to him in ways she hadn't expected. The small human child who had clung to her, broken and afraid, was now stronger. His eyes were brighter. He was healing, slowly but surely. But there was a problem. The peace they were trying to build between the Enrine and humans was fragile. Ailari was the key to it, a symbol of hope between the two species. The council had spoken clearly. There could be no exceptions. Ailari knew what was coming. They couldn't keep the boy with her forever. Even if she had grown attached to him, even if he had become like a younger brother in her care, she couldn't ignore her duty. One day, as the ship drifted through the stars, the captain called her to the bridge. Sol was with her, playing with a small toy she had given him, a little replica of an Enrine ship. But his eyes were distant now. He could feel the change in the air, the tension between them. Larry stood before the captain, her hand resting on the cool metal railing. She looked out at the dark expanse of space, the light of distant stars twinkling like tiny promises of peace. The captain's voice was firm. "Princess Larry, the time has come. You must send the child to the human relief station. It is what is best for both our people." Her heart sank. She had known this moment was coming, but knowing didn't make it easier. Saul had become her responsibility, her promise. But now she had to keep that promise, to give him a future with his own kind. "I understand," she replied quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Saul's tiny footsteps echoed as he approached her, his toy ship held tightly in his small hands. He looked up at her, confusion clouding his face. "Princess Larry," he asked softly, "why are we stopping? Are we going to stay here forever?" Larry crouched down so she was eye level with him. She could see the innocence still shining in his eyes, the trust he had placed in her. It hurt more than anything to know that soon she would have to say goodbye. "No, Saul," she said, her voice gentle. "We have to go to a place where you can be with your people. It's time for you to go home." His eyes widened. "Home," he whispered. "But I want to stay with you." Larry's heart tightened. She reached out and gently placed the small pendant around his neck, the same one she had worn when they first met. "This will remind you of me," she said softly. "And when you're ready, you can find me again. You'll be strong. And one day, you will be the one to protect others." Saul didn't speak. He only nodded, though his eyes filled with sadness. Larry kissed his forehead, her heart heavy with the weight of this parting. As the ship descended toward the relief station, Larry turned away, holding back tears. She had kept her promise to save him. But now she had to let him go. Years had passed since Larry had last seen Saul. The memories of that day, of the child she had protected, still haunted her. But she had moved forward, leading her people through war and peace. The alliance between the Anreen and humans was fragile, but it was growing. Larry had worked hard to keep the peace, to make sure both sides had a future. But today, standing at the front of the Grand Hall in the Anreen capital, Larry could feel a storm brewing. She was here to negotiate a final peace treaty between the two races. The humans were at the table, and the Anreen were ready to sign. The hall was filled with officials, diplomats, and military leaders, all eager to finalize the deal. Larry stood tall, her silver armor reflecting the light of the great windows that stretched to the sky. She had to be strong. This was her responsibility. But her mind wandered. She thought about Saul, the little boy who had trusted her so completely. Was he still alive? Had he grown into the soldier he always promised to become? As the meeting began, Larry tried to focus, listening to the human delegation as they discussed the final terms. But there was a noise, a strange murmur in the crowd. Larry's sharp ears picked up on it immediately. She turned, and there, standing at the back of the room, was a figure she had never expected to see. It was Saul. But he was not the small, silent child she had known. He had grown into a man. His face was hardened by years of war. His eyes, though, still held that same quiet strength, the same quiet pain that Larry remembered. He stood tall, his uniform sharp and military, his posture one of authority. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. Saul stepped forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor, each step measured and confident. He didn't look at Larry at first. Instead, his eyes were focused on the human delegation, his face unreadable. Larry's heart skipped a beat. It was impossible. She had told him to go home, to be with his people. She hadn't expected him to return, especially not like this. But when Saul finally turned his gaze toward her, something in his eyes softened, just for a moment. He didn't smile, but there was a quiet understanding between them. The boy she had saved was now a soldier, a protector of his people. Larry couldn't help herself. She moved toward him, her feet almost carrying her before she realized what she was doing. As she got closer, Saul spoke first, his voice low and steady. "Princess Alari," he said, his words respectful but distant. "It's been a long time." Alari's voice caught in her throat. "Saul," her breath caught. You're here." "I am," Saul replied, his eyes flickering to the humans in the room. "I'm here to make sure the peace we've worked for stays intact." Alari swallowed. He had come back not as the boy she had saved, but as a soldier ready to protect, ready to fight if necessary. "Are you?" she started, her voice unsure. "Are you ready to fight for this peace?" Saul nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'll fight for it, Princess, for both our people." Alari stood in silence, looking at the man who had once been a child in her arms. He was no longer the little boy she had known, but in many ways, he was still the same. The peace talks were over for the day, but Alari couldn't focus. Her mind kept returning to Saul, the boy she had once saved, now standing before her as a man, a soldier. She had known he would grow, but seeing him like this, so different, felt like a blow to her heart. They had agreed to meet later, away from the crowded halls of the capital. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city as Alari made her way to the balcony of her private chambers. She stood there for a moment, looking out at the stars. The vastness of space seemed to mirror the distance between them. He wasn't the same boy she had held in her arms. The door to her chamber slid open, and Saul stepped inside. He didn't need to be invited. He had been given full access to the palace, now that the treaty had progressed, and he moved through the halls with the confidence of someone who had fought for everything he had. Alari turned to face him as he stepped into the room. He was taller now, his posture straight, his eyes hard with the weight of years spent in war. But there was something familiar in the way he looked at her, something that made Alari's chest tighten. "Saul," she said softly, "I wasn't sure you would come." He gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "I had to, Princess." His voice was steady but distant. "There's a lot of tension between our people. I wanted to see if the peace you've been fighting for was real." Alari swallowed. The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. He had come to test her, to see if she truly believed in the peace she had worked for, to see if she was ready to fight for it. "I don't just want peace, Saul," Alari said, her voice stronger now. "I want something better. I want to build a future where we don't have to fight anymore, where our people can live side by side." Saul didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to her, his gaze still fixed on her, but his eyes softened slightly. "You've changed, Alari," he said, his voice quieter now. "You used to be so sure, so certain that peace was the only way. Now," he trailed off, shaking his head, "now I can see the doubt in you." Alari looked away, her heart heavy. She had always been certain. As a child, she had seen war from the inside. She had promised herself she would never let it happen again. But now, as an adult, as a leader, the weight of her decisions seemed harder to bear. The cost of peace was never simple. It was filled with hard choices, sacrifices, and compromises. "I'm not sure of anything anymore," she admitted softly. "I just know we have to try. If we don't, everything we fought for will be meaningless." Saul looked at her with understanding. "You've always had a strong will, Princess. That's why I followed you. But sometimes strength isn't enough. Sometimes we need something else." Alari looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "What do you mean?" Saul's lips curled into a small, almost sad smile. "Sometimes we need to trust each other, not just in our strength, but in our ability to believe in each other, to believe that peace is worth fighting for." Alari felt a warmth rise in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like there was hope, not just for her people, but for her and Saul. Perhaps, despite everything, they could still find a way to build something better together. The planet was a war zone. What had once been a thriving colony was now nothing more than a ghost town, its buildings reduced to rubble, its streets lined with charred remains. Alari's ship hovered above the dust-covered surface, casting a long shadow over the broken city. Her heart sank as she looked down. This was no ordinary attack. The Volturi, the rogue bioengineers, were known for their cruelty. They had been responsible for creating deadly hybrid soldiers, blending human and alien DNA with dangerous technology. If they were behind this, then this world was lost, unless they acted fast. "This is where the last transmission came from," Hilary said, her voice steady but laced with worry. She turned to Sol, who was now standing by her side. He had been quiet since their conversation the night before, his expression distant, as he surveyed the scene below. "I know," Sol replied. His voice was firm, but there was a hint of anger buried in it. "They're not just attacking us. They're trying to send a message." Alari nodded. The Volturi didn't care about peace or alliances. They thrived on chaos, using fear and destruction as their weapons. The Enrine and human forces were struggling to hold their ground. But with the Volturi growing bolder, it was clear that something had to be done. Sol's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, and Alari followed his gaze. "We can't waste any time," he said. "If we're going to stop them, we need to move fast." Alari turned to the crew. "Prepare the ground teams. We'll take the lead. No one gets left behind." Sol gave a nod. "I'll go with you, Princess. We can't afford to let them slip away." They both suited up in their combat gear, the weight of their responsibilities heavier than ever. As the airlock doors opened and the drop pod descended into the city, Alari couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But there was no choice. The lives of countless innocents were at risk. When the pod landed, dust and debris rose around them, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. The city was eerily quiet. They moved swiftly, their boots crunching on the broken streets, eyes constantly scanning for movement. They didn't speak much, knowing that every word could give away their position. The only sounds were the wind and the occasional distant explosion. Suddenly, a shrill screech echoed through the air. Alari's heart raced as she saw movement in the distance, shadows darting between the ruins. "They're here," Sol said, his voice low but steady. "Get ready." The two of them moved into position, taking cover behind a collapsed building. Alari could feel her pulse quicken. This was it, the battle they had prepared for. The Volturi were known for their hybrids, humans fused with alien technology, their bodies half machine and half living flesh, and from the looks of it, they were ready for a fight. Hilary raised her weapon and checked the charge. She looked at Sol, who was crouched beside her, his face hard, his expression focused. He had been through battles before. But this was different. This was personal. As the first wave of Volturi hybrids approached, Alari felt a fire ignite within her. She wasn't just fighting for her people anymore. She was fighting for the future, for peace, for the child she had once saved, and for the man he had become. Together, they would stop the chaos. Together, they would win. The battle had begun. The battle had been fierce. Explosions echoed through the empty streets, and the sound of gunfire mixed with the roar of engines. Alari and Sol fought side by side, moving swiftly between the ruins, their weapons blazing. The Volturi hybrids were everywhere, fast and deadly, their bodies a twisted blend of alien technology and human flesh. Alari's breath came in sharp gasps as she ducked behind a crumbled wall, firing at a group of approaching enemies. Her heart raced, not just from the battle, but from something deeper. Sol was with her, but she knew that the dangers they faced here were unlike anything they had fought before. The Volturi were ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to destroy their enemies. She glanced over at Sol, who was moving quickly, his eyes sharp with focus. Despite the chaos around them, there was something calming about his presence. He was no longer the scared child she had rescued. He was a soldier now, hardened by war, but still carrying the same quiet strength she remembered. The Volturi were closing in, and Alari knew they couldn't keep up the fight forever. "We need to get to the command center," she called to Sol, her voice urgent. We have to stop them before they send out the signal. Saul nodded, his eyes never leaving the enemy. Agreed. Follow me. They sprinted through the ruins, ducking behind debris and taking cover as they moved. The city was almost entirely destroyed, the buildings nothing more than broken skeletons of their former selves. It was hard to imagine that this place had once been a thriving colony. Now it was nothing more than a battleground. As they approached the command center, the air grew tense. Ailari could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They had to stop the Volturi. They had to stop the war. They reached the entrance, and Saul gestured for Ailari to take the lead. With a deep breath, Ailari pushed open the door, her weapon ready. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the walls lined with computers and equipment. But it wasn't empty. A group of Volturi soldiers was waiting for them, their glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. Without hesitation, Ailari and Saul opened fire, taking down the first wave of enemies with quick, precise shots. The Volturi retaliated, launching themselves toward the two of them with inhuman speed. But Ailari and Saul were faster. They moved as one, anticipating each other's moves, covering each other's backs. For a brief moment, Ailari could almost forget the war. It was just her and Saul, working together like they had always done. But the Volturi were relentless, and Ailari knew they couldn't keep this up for long. Finally, they'd reached the central control console. Ailari quickly hacked into the system, her fingers moving across the controls with expert precision. The room was quiet now. The fighting paused for the moment. But the silence was deafening. "Done," she said, her voice a whisper. She looked at Saul, her eyes locking with his. "We stopped them." Saul nodded, but his expression was grim. "For now," he said, "but this isn't over. The Volturi won't stop until they have total control." Ailari took a deep breath, the weight of their victory settling over her. The battle was far from over, but for now, they had won. And that was enough. The command center was quiet now, but the victory felt hollow. Ailari stared at the blinking lights on the control panel, her thoughts racing. The Volturi had been stopped, for now. But she knew better than to think they had truly won. The peace they had worked for, the fragile alliance between humans and Enrine, was still at risk. Saul was beside her, his eyes scanning the room, always alert. "We've done it," he said, but his voice lacked the triumph Ailari expected. "It's not over," Ailari replied, her voice low and steady. "They won't stop until they've destroyed everything we've built." She had been fighting for peace for so long, but with every battle, it seemed further away. The Volturi were just one enemy in a long list of forces that threatened the fragile alliance. Ailari had never been naive enough to believe peace would come easily, but she had hoped, for the sake of everyone, that it would be worth the fight. Saul glanced at her, his eyes softening slightly. "I know, but we can't stop. We've come too far to turn back now." Ailari nodded, though doubt still clung to her heart. There were too many enemies, too many obstacles standing between them, and a lasting peace. And now, with the battle over, it was clear that the real work had just begun. They made their way out of the command center, the air heavy with the weight of their shared understanding. The streets outside were quiet now, the sounds of battle replaced by the quiet hum of the damaged city. It was a strange kind of silence, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next storm to come. As they walked, Ailari couldn't help but think back to the day she had first met Saul. He had been just a child, scared and alone. Now here he was, strong, determined, and ready to fight for the future. She couldn't help but feel proud of him, even though the path he had taken had been filled with pain and loss. "Do you ever wonder if it's all worth it?" Ailari asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. Saul didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked ahead, his expression unreadable. "I don't think about whether it's worth it," he said finally. "I think about whether we can make it work. If we give up now, it'll all have been for nothing." Ailari sighed, running a hand through her hair. Sol was right. Giving up wasn't an option. But the weight of the choices they had to make, the sacrifices they had to endure, it was starting to feel like too much. The people they were fighting for, the world they were trying to save. Did they even understand the price of peace? I don't know if I can keep carrying this weight, Alari said quietly, her voice barely audible. Sol stopped walking and turned to her, his face serious. You don't have to do it alone, he said, his hand resting on her shoulder. We're in this together, and we'll find a way. Alari looked at him, feeling a surge of gratitude. In that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, they could make it. They had come this far, together, and they would keep moving forward, no matter what. The days after the battle passed in a blur. Alari and Sol remained at the capital, overseeing the repairs and helping to rebuild the damaged city. The peace they had fought for still hung in the balance, and every decision felt heavier than the last. The Volturi had been pushed back, but it wasn't enough to end the war. The true fight for peace had only just begun. Alari sat alone in her private quarters, her fingers tracing the smooth surface of the ancient stone tablet that had been passed down through generations of Enreen leaders. It was a symbol of their people's strength, but today it felt like a reminder of everything she had lost, and everything still at risk. She hadn't seen Sol much over the past few days. He had been working with the human military leaders, trying to coordinate a joint defense against the Volturi. They needed to unite their forces if they were to have any chance of defeating the enemy for good. But it was hard to keep hope alive when every day seemed to bring more challenges. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up, surprised. Come in. The door slid open, and Sol stepped inside. He looked tired, his uniform slightly rumpled from the long hours he had been working. But there was a determination in his eyes that never wavered. Princess, he began, his voice steady. We've received new intelligence. The Volturi are regrouping. They've started rebuilding their forces. Alari's heart sank. She had feared this. The Volturi were relentless. Where? She asked quietly. They've moved to a new planet, one of their old strongholds. It's heavily fortified, but we've got a chance if we act quickly, Sol replied, his voice filled with urgency. Alari stood, her mind racing. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. They had to strike now before the Volturi could build up their power again. But the thought of sending soldiers into another battle weighed heavily on her. How long do we have? Alari asked, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. A few weeks at most. The sooner we move, the better, Sol answered. Alari nodded, taking a deep breath. She had always known this day would come. The fight for peace was never going to be easy, but now it felt different. There was a sense of urgency, a feeling that everything they had worked for would either collapse or grow stronger in the coming days. She looked at Sol, her heart heavy with the burden of leadership. Are you ready? She asked softly. Sol didn't hesitate. I've been ready for this my whole life. We can't back down now. Alari nodded, her gaze firm. Then we'll do whatever it takes to win, for the future of both our people. As Sol left to prepare for the mission, Alari stood alone in the quiet of her chambers. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and sacrifice. But one thing was clear, there was no turning back. She and Sol would fight, side by side, to protect the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build. The fight for the future was just beginning. The planet they were heading to was far from peaceful. Alari stood at the helm of the warship, watching as the stars blurred by in a streak of light. The mission ahead was dangerous, but she had no choice. The Volturi had regrouped, and this time, they would not be allowed to rise again. This was the final chance for peace. If they failed, there would be no second chances. Beside her, Sol was already focused on the mission, his eyes scanning the battle plans laid out on the display. His face was serious, his jaw set with determination. He had become a leader in his own right, someone who others looked to for guidance and strength. Alari couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for him. "Are we ready?" Alari asked, her voice calm but filled with purpose. Sol nodded, his eyes not leaving the screen. "We're ready. The human forces are in position. The Enrine fleet will arrive shortly. But we have to strike fast. The Volturi won't give us time." Alari took a deep breath, her mind racing through the plans. The enemy was strong, and their fortress was well protected, but they had one advantage: the element of surprise. They had to make their move before the Volturi could react. "We'll make it," Alari said, though she couldn't quite convince herself. The stakes were too high. One mistake, and everything would crumble. Sol turned to face her, his eyes softening slightly. "I know. And we'll do it together, like always." The words were simple, but they brought Alari a moment of comfort. She had fought alongside Sol before, but this battle was different. It wasn't just about the future of their people. It was about everything they had built, everything they had sacrificed to get to this point. The ship's engines hummed as they entered the Volturi's airspace. Alari felt her heart beat faster. She could already feel the tension in the air. This was it. No more waiting, no more second chances. They would either win, or they would lose everything. The communications officer turned to them. "We're approaching the Volturi base, Princess. All ships are in position. We're ready to launch." Alari nodded. "Proceed. But remember, our goal is to stop them, not to destroy everything. We need to strike fast and hard." Sol's eyes met hers, a shared understanding passing between them. "We'll do what we must." As the battle began, Alari's heart pounded in her chest. The Volturi's defenses were fierce, but their arrogance had left them vulnerable. Sol led the charge, his ship moving with precision as he targeted the enemy's weak points. Alari stayed close, guiding the Enrine fleet into position. Every move they made was calculated, each moment building toward their ultimate goal. For a time, the battle raged on, the sky above them lit with the flashes of explosions. The Volturi fought back with everything they had, but Alari could see their defenses weakening. This was it, the turning point. Alari's voice rang out over the comms. "Now, Sol, it's time to end this." He didn't hesitate. With a swift move, he led the final charge, and the enemy's defenses began to crumble. The war was not over yet, but this battle, this one moment, would decide everything.